Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to see you here this afternoon, even though many of you I can't see since we are on webinar format today, but we're really glad to have you here for our In Alignment event. This is something we've been waiting to do for a long time, this conversation about housing provision, policing, and racial justice. I'm going to be introducing our awesome panelists in just a few minutes, and you'll have plenty of time to weigh in via the Q&A, but let's just do a little bit of housekeeping and preliminaries first of all. Of course, as I already said, we're in the webinar format today, so you can't chat, but you can put things in the Q&A, so please feel free to do that. And just be as present as you can. So that's the button that says Q&A. It's different from chat if you're more used to Zoom meetings. So please put your comments in that Q&A button. There's also captioning available. So if you see that button that says live transcript, you can click on that and say subtitles. And then if you want to read captions as we're speaking, you can do that. The first thing I'd like to do before we kick off this event is just to do an acknowledgement that we're starting to do at all of East Bay Housing Organization's events, which is that as we gather to celebrate affordable housing and promote housing justice, we must also acknowledge Indigenous people as the stewards of the land on which we live and build. This East Bay is the unceded territory of the Lisjana Ohlone people. As we work against the displacement of people in our communities, we recognize and we name the history of displacement of the communities that existed here before us. We also uplift the work of our Ohlone neighbors to create spaces of belonging. EBHO is in the process of paying Shumi, a voluntary land tax that supports the work of Segorate Land Trust, which returns Ohlone land to Ohlone people. We'll be engaging with our members and supporters later this year to encourage you all to do the same, so stay tuned. And with that acknowledgement and honoring, I want to pass it next to one of our board members, David Zisser of Housing California. He's going to put this event in context of the celebrations we're doing of housing justice all month. David.
Thanks, Gloria. Everyone can hear me okay? Good. So I'm David Zisser. I am Associate Director at Housing California and very proud to be a new board member with EBHO. Since 1984, East Bay Housing Organizations has worked with our members to create, preserve, and protect affordable housing opportunities for low-income communities in the East Bay by advocating, organizing, educating, and building coalitions. We celebrate Affordable Housing Month to call attention to the housing affordability crisis and to lift up solutions and celebrate our achievements. This year is the 25th annual Affordable Housing Month. By being here, you are joining hundreds of people around Alameda and Contra Costa counties at 13 events. Please take a look at the calendar to see the amazing lineup of events this month. We will share a link in the chat, and everything is free and virtual. We believe communities are healthiest and most powerful when we have quality, affordable homes for all, and when those most affected by the housing crisis can shape their own futures. Thank you to all our members for helping us to further in the East Bay. In today's difficult environment, what you do is more important than ever for advancing social and racial justice, prosperity, and sustainability. Today we celebrate and learn, but after this, let's take action. We're excited to release our new study room, which replaces the printed affordable housing guidebook we've created for more than a decade, while retaining the same goal: to serve as a knowledge base for our members and supporters, to educate the public about what affordable housing in the East Bay looks like and who lives there, and to share information about how we can create the just, thriving communities that we need. The study room will be a hub of new evergreen content created by EBHO and our members, and share valuable research and education tools created by others. So please sign up to receive the announcement once it's launched. There should be a link for that. Finally, we invite you to join me as a proud and active EBHO member so you can help create, preserve, and protect affordable homes for all. With your support, our collective impact grows. Together, we can create an East Bay where everyone is housed and everyone lives in beloved community. Please contact us if you're interested, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. We're so glad to have you on the board and have Housing California as a partner, and we hope that all of you will check out the study room and the events that David just described. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, our communications manager, Grover Wayman Brown, who is a big part of conceptualizing today's discussion, and they're going to just give some framing for what we're talking about today. Grover.
Thank you, Gloria, and hello, everyone. Yes, this event is the product of many conversations with EBHO staff and membership, and I'm glad that you all can join us today. EBHO's membership is made of people who live in affordable housing, providers of affordable housing, government staff, and advocates that rent or are homeowners of market rate housing, some of whom rent out properties that they own. Last year, millions of people took to the streets to protest police violence against Black and Brown communities after Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. At the end of the summer, organizations and individuals made public commitments to affirm that Black Lives Matter and to strengthen racial justice within our organizations. And still, the work is ongoing as police violence against Black and Brown communities continues, including the killing of Mario Gonzalez by Alameda Police Department in the city where I live last month. Housing and policing currently intersect in a number of ways. This conversation is an opportunity to reflect on policing, housing, and racial justice through a discussion between 4 leaders in our community about their experience. We hope this discussion helps our members and supporters continue to align our work with the commitments to racial justice and hopefully implement solutions that can reduce harm. Finally, we know that for some people, the topics that we're going to talk about today are deeply personal and sometimes painful. If this is your experience, we hope you will do what you need to take care. If this topic seems theoretical or distant to your experience, we encourage strong listening and learning today. Thank you, and I pass it back to Gloria to introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Grover. It's really great words to take us into this discussion, which I think will be really illuminating and helpful, but also could be very emotional and painful and real as well. So let me introduce you to our guides to this discussion. I'm so glad to have all of them here in alphabetical order by last name. First, I'm really glad to have Kaija Carter, who is the Oakland Rights-Based Services Counselor and Organizer at Causa, Justa, Just Cause organization that's been doing awesome work in Oakland and San Francisco for over a decade, and we're so glad to partner with them. And Kaija wears many hats, but she'll be representing Causa Justa today. And after Kaija, we have Ener Chiu, who is the Associate Director of Real Estate Development at EBALDC, the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, also a longtime Oakland resident, active in Chinatown Coalition, also many hats, including a graduate school colleague of mine. So glad to have Ener here, loving that background. Next, we have Marcia Lovelace, who is with the Alternatives to Policing Coalition with First Congregational Church of Oakland, a really important community institution and faith community in North Oakland Lake area, right across from the Whole Foods. So we are so glad to have Marcia with us today, representing a faith community that's been a longtime partner of EBHO. And finally, very pleased to have Damien Scott, who is a community organizer with EBHO. He's been with us just a little bit over a year, joined us about 2 months before lockdown. So I'm glad I got to meet him in person before that happened. Damien works with residents of affordable housing, but also will be speaking today from his experience as an affordable housing resident himself. So I think you heard most of the framing that you needed from Grover, and I'll just also say that what today's purpose is to really make those connections between affordable housing, housing justice, and public safety and policing that aren't frankly always made in the housing world as clearly as they should be. And since more and more of us in the housing space, especially including at EBHO, are trying to make our work more explicitly about racial justice and redress of racism and harm, it's really important that we have this conversation. Our goal today isn't to duplicate other conversations that you may have heard or debates about defunding the police or abolition. We are not an organization out in front of that. And we want to leave that space to those organizations that are, and lead with our expertise and the experience of our panelists. So that being said, it's all about making connections and perhaps pointing towards solutions today. And one way that we are explicitly addressing this at EBHO right now is trying to work in the city of Oakland for a just budget together with the Refund Coalition, where for the first time, we've always advocated for more money for affordable housing production, protection, and preservation. We always need that, we still do, but we are more explicitly saying to the city, you need to divest in excessive policing and jailing, you need to invest in housing and healing. And so that is what we are headed towards today. So I'm going to start by asking our panelists a series of questions that most or all of them will answer. And then when we get through that, then we'll open it up to Q&A for all of you. Please feel free to go ahead and put those questions in the chat earlier if they do come to you, but we'll make sure to get those at the end. first, I'm going to ask our panelists if they could each start off by giving one example in your experience, in your community, or in your work of where you see housing and homelessness issues and policing issues intersect. So I'm going to start with Kaija for this one.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Well, I work on a hotline for the city of Oakland, and oftentimes we do get calls by tenants who are kind of in panic about evictions that are happening. And evictions are carried out by sheriffs who are agents of the state. And the tenants who call into our hotline are most times Black and Brown residents who already experience a high level of extreme terror and fear from police and other state forces, such as ICE, who are usually illegally called on tenants by landlords as a means of harassment. And so this is a glaring display of how the state works in tandem with landlords to uphold racist and anti-immigrant sentiments. Having them show up to your home during an eviction, which is already really scary, is in a demeaning experience, can be hard. And when the sheriffs arrives, it just adds another layer of fear and intimidation for tenants in those situations. And I think one glaring example of how our local sheriff's department here in Oakland enacts violence while carrying out evictions is the Moms for Housing action fight, where 4 Black moms took over a vacant home in West Oakland in a historically Black area. And after occupying the home throughout a few weeks, the Alameda County Sheriff's Office evicted the moms and their children in a high-profile militarized raid. And sheriff's deputies were all in riot gear and armed as well. And that whole operation of the eviction took $40,000 from the county, which could have easily housed those families. So it just further highlights that, Alameda County Police can be swiftly defunded from so that our communities can have the means of funding for things like homes that are safe and affordable.
Thank you so much, Kaija. That's really, wow, those are some, I'm sure many of us followed that saga, and it's about so much more than resources and dollar signs. But when you put that, in addition to the terror, you put sort of the public resource price tag on it, it's really striking. I'm going to move to Ener now. Ener, what are you seeing in your work and your experience?
Thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks, Kaija, for sharing that as well. I work for East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation. We're a nonprofit community development organization, and we have developed and manage about close to 2,000 apartments in the city of Oakland. I'm not a community safety or policing expert. I'm a real estate developer. And a lot of my work on this has been over the last couple of years, as we've been kind of looking for ways to really think differently about community safety, in particular in some of the neighborhoods that we have a really strong historic presence, like Oakland Chinatown. And in the last 6 months or so, we've also seen a really kind of escalation of anti-API violence. And so that has been, I think, a really focusing moment for us as an organization around kind of this issue and how we address it and how we deal with it and how we find alternatives for dealing with it. I think for the API community in general, we're just a very ideologically diverse community, and we have a lot of different views within our community about policing. There are certainly folks who are in the abolish and defund camps on police, and there are a lot of people who say, like, hey, we can't see living with fewer police in Oakland. And so those ideas and the spectrum is really really wide and there for us. I think by the end of this conversation today, I'd love just to share a little bit about kind of what we're doing in Oakland Chinatown to present alternatives to policing, to understand kind of what community safety is in our neighborhoods, to understand how the models of community safety that we have currently work for some of us, but not others, and how to move towards alternatives that are a little bit more kind of community-oriented, community accountable, and frankly, as a taxpayer, as an Oakland taxpayer, cheaper than the alternatives that we have currently. So I'm excited to share kind of some of those throughout the conversation today.
Thanks so much, Ener. Marcia, want to share?
Thank you so much. Thank you for including me. Well, the juxtaposition and intersectionality of housing and policing issues are at the heart of why we started the Alternatives to Policing project. It began with an incident where on a Sunday afternoon, a mentally ill, unhoused person would not leave the building, and we couldn't figure out how to help this person. And when we called the police, one of our members was harassed by the police because supposedly she fit the description, which she did not. And it was such a wake-up call for those of us who don't have to deal with policing in that way, that we began to ask ourselves, how can we re-envision what does public safety mean that would be safety for everyone? And that's how we started the project.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that honest telling of how the congregation came to be in that space. And you all have really done some groundbreaking work in that area. Damien.
Hello. Yes, like Ener, I am not an expert on policing. I am a resident, and I will give a resident's perspective. Well, so my family, we lived at an EBALDC property actually in East Oakland, and we lived there since I was basically in high school up until a few months ago. And I was thinking about this question and sort of, what your experience in dealing with policing. And it really, I thought of not really my experience, but experience of a cousin of mine who was living with us. And I should say, as a content warning, this story does include domestic violence. A few years ago, my cousin lived with us and she was being harassed and stalked by a boyfriend. And he was physically aggressive with her. He did assault her, and she would come home with bruising. And back in the day in East Oakland, when that happened to a female cousin of yours, you got her brother, you got your cousins, and you went and find that dude and you beat him up. But of course, I'm a college graduate. I'm thinking, you know what? Hey, that's not what we do. We call the police. Let's call the police. So I got my cousin. I said, hey, let's make a statement. Let's call the police. She called the police. And then after we made the statement, eventually, I think police, specifically Oakland Housing Authority police came, which I didn't know that existed, but I'm assuming it's specifically for anything related to public housing and things like that. And they had also got a statement. And sort of what ended up happening later was she got a message from the police saying that for the Oakland Housing Authority police, that in her statement, she said she was living at this property. She wasn't on the lease. So they said, you've been living here for too long. So you have 30 days to vacate the premises, or, you'll be breaking your lease. And, we were, of course, devastated by the information. The issue of this boyfriend who was stalking her, that sort of got fixed, not from the police doing, but from what the police did. It caused her to have to leave the property. She ended up coming back later, of course, because, she didn't learn her lesson from that. The lesson she did learn from that, though, was to not call the police whenever she's being abused. And she told me that this morning, that now that she lives in a house, she feels a lot safer and more comfortable calling the police if she has to. But living in that situation, precarious, where she's sort of living in between the lines, she realized that the like Kai was saying, arm of the state really didn't exist to protect her rights. And that just seems like unsustainable practice, in my opinion, in a resident's opinion, on ensuring residents of affordable housing are safe.
Wow, thank you, Damien, for sharing that. And thanks to your cousin for allowing us to hear and learn from that. And I'm so glad that she's okay. And, when you started, Damien, you said, I'm not an expert in police reform. That one of the things I wanted have us all hold during today's discussion is that a lot of what we do at EBO is try to break down this false distinction between technical expertise and lived experience. I think we're all believers that we all have both, right, in different ways. So we are all an expert in our own experience. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it, you know, if any of you have read the work of Matthew Desmond, he talks a lot about both the militarization of evictions that Kaija mentioned, and also talks a lot about how for so many female identified people, it is a choice between calling the police and keeping your housing. And we just have to figure out there's got to be a different way forward. So, you know, my next question kind of, you know, stays in this place. I think we all just identified some challenges and some barriers for sure, but I want to probe a little bit deeper and say, well, what are the continued challenges or the things that are getting in the way of us changing some of this dynamic to ensuring public safety, which is super, obviously that's paramount, while reducing these negative interactions for residents and neighbors. So I'm gonna go backwards this time. And Damien, I'm gonna go back to you if that's okay. What do you see as some of the things getting in the way of the change that we need?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the perspective of a resident of affordable housing really isn't that different of someone who, you know, lives in the surrounding community, who maybe lives in a house or lives in a market rate housing, especially in East Oakland. Before I lived in affordable housing, I definitely felt the presence of police as not really a organization that exists to protect you, but more of an occupying force. Especially in Sabrani Park, there was a lot of violence in that, but one of the most violent neighborhoods in East Oakland. So there was always police presence. And yeah, I think one of the issues exists is just that the police, like I said, seem like an occupying force. There's no relationship with the community. They're just there to keep everyone in check. And you know, as a young Black man, that really felt like they existed to keep you in check, keep me in check. And I don't know where we go from there. I think my solution would be to solve racism and income inequality. I think those two things, looking at those things, will go a long way in you know, fixing the issue with policing. I rarely hear about police brutality happening in Walnut Creek, where a lot of Oakland police officers live. So I think considering those situations, as hard as it is to fix policing, of course, fixing racism and income inequality is even more so. But I think it's important when having the conversation, really have to see how all those different things intersect in this issue.
Thank you so much for that. I think that this really hones in on, well, so all we have to do is end racism and racialized capitalism and income inequality. So we got this. I think that the points you make about income and class, and you even mentioned that once your educational status changed, that your perspective changed. And I'm just thinking about the fact that I'm a queer Black woman, but I'm a homeowner. I'm also someone who doesn't necessarily read as queer and Black to everybody, right? And so my experiences with the police, very different than someone who doesn't have that property standing, that income standing. So it's really important. I think one step is for all of us to hear how our experiences are so different. To that end, let me go back to Marcia and talk to us a little bit more about some of the challenges that you and First Congregational encountered.
Well, I think the root cause of the challenges is our priorities are all screwed up. That our city spends about half of the budget on police, cutting all social services, employment opportunities, education, recreation. Big one is mental health services, and then a lack of affordable housing, and choosing to say they're dealing with the unhoused by creating a team to sweep out encampments and destroy their property, instead of seeing that you solve the housing crisis by housing people. I mean, a lack of people having conflict resolution training and self-defense training is another problem. And then the other root is systemic racism and unconscious bias, especially when you arm it and put a badge on it that gives you permission to use that weapon.
Thank you for that. Ener, did you want to speak to this question?
Yeah, well, I think I want to just add a little bit to Marcia's point about, part of the context that we're also all living in at this moment is not only the centuries long kind of historic and present kind of like racial and economic segregation. It's also this particular moment of COVID, which has been really, really challenging for folks. And I think it has made a lot of us, many of us, just more desperate, and I think less positively social. We've forgotten how to interact with folks. We've become afraid of people. We've become more afraid of people, I should say, I guess, who are different from us or who may not know. Or and I think also we have this this challenge of kind of how our public services are aligned, where we think of people who are in desperate situations as being kind of at fault for their being in the desperate situation that they're in, and that the way to fix that is to make their situation even more desperate so that they will somehow fix themselves and get out of that desperate situation. And I think we can see very clearly like that doesn't work. Like you don't fix a problem by making it worse so that they'll be even more motivated to get out of it. Like that is more likely to make them lash out at other folks. I think, again, and bringing back to the focus, since this is not only Housing Month, it is also API Heritage Month. I think for APIs specifically, I think part of the challenge that we've had in our community is also just language. I think that when in some of our conversations with business owners in Chinatown, they've been very clear, like tensions with customers when folks come in and they speak English and the staff at the restaurant or the business don't speak English, that is so much more likely to escalate a really harmless little situation that could be fixed with some understanding into something that becomes like suspicious or like racially profiled, or like just it takes something that should be harmless and be able to resolve in like a minute into something that has to get like dragged out into a much more complex situation. And so I think that is part of a challenge of living in a city as diverse as Oakland, is that our differences are not only our strengths, but they also do increase the amount of friction that we have with one another. And so I think we just have to recognize that about ourselves, is that part of what makes this so challenging is that we have lots of different folks from lots of social and cultural and economic backgrounds kind of rubbing up against one another very, very closely. So that is a continuing challenge. And instead of finding ways to deal with that, like we sometimes have involved the police in trying to fix those like social differences instead of figuring out how to work through them with one another. So.
Wow, Ener, thank you for bringing COVID specific and just the language barrier. That makes so much sense. And I'm also just thinking, oh gosh, if you can't communicate with verbal language and your face is covered with a mask, so you can't even rely on facial expressions. And I think that's really intense. And then also kind of it's not just class and racial backgrounds, but our cultural and national experiences of whether or not the state is a thing to be relied upon and trusted, which is also very specific culture to culture and from origins, right? And so whether you're more or less likely to call on the state if there's something going on. So that's very real. Thank you for that. Kaija, close us out on this one.
Yeah, just really taking in all of my panelists' responses. And what I'm just hearing is, public safety really has to be safe in order for, in order for these measures to really work for community members. And the challenges that are set up right now with public safety isn't informed or really trained to de-escalate high stress or crisis situations that ultimately alleviates harm or danger, especially for community members who are not white or unhoused. So again, our communities have for a long time experienced generations of harm from police, And these institutional commitments to violence by police have not been abolished, but have only been essentially scaffolded on. So I think the challenge will always be that systems and formations for safety have to truly be safe. And here within Oakland, our communities are reimagining what safety looks like, and are creating community-led alternatives to policing as a direct means of ensuring that we can address safety for our communities our community members who are experiencing mental health crisis, or who are within intimate partner violence and need de-escalation, and even for tenants who need support experiencing violence. We have to really be thinking about what safety looks like for us, and have a commitment for that. And safety has to be safe.
Absolutely. And I think you actually just started to bring us into our next question, which is, you know, as we're feeling the heaviness in this, I know I can just like feel this conversation in my body. I need to like breathe through it. But taking us to what's the way forward? Are we seeing paths forward? Are we seeing glimmers of hope or ways of doing different things differently? I'm going to open this one up to whoever wants to speak first. Kaija, you started talking about solutions or alternatives. But yeah, how do we ensure that we live by the mantra that we keep us safe? Anyone like to jump in there?
I wonder if I could start with some things that are like not policing related, which are, you know, we really need to open stuff back up again. I mean, I think so much of safety, when I think about safety, is not like, when I think of like when I feel safe in a place, it's not for me that I look over my shoulder and like, oh, there's a police officer, I feel safe. For me, it's like a feeling of like, oh, it's like a feeling of freedom, I think. Like a feeling of like, oh, I'm happy to be here. I don't feel worried about my environment. I know people around me. I feel like if something were to happen, like someone would say something, like someone would recognize me. Someone would be like, hey, I got you. Like, don't worry about it. And part of that muscle memory, I think, needs to be, you know, a building back of our social institutions, like the institutions that really help us experience one another in positive ways. And I'm talking specifically about our rec centers, our parks, our schools, like these like public institutions that we all can belong to. You know, we need to figure out how to reopen those things safely and quickly. Because the more that we get isolated, I think the more we'll feel like we'll have to rely on sort of armed third parties to protect us. And, you know, it's already in some cases like the escalation in gun violence we've had in Oakland in 2020 and 2021 has been really, we're not going to be at our best, and we're not going to do our best and most creative thinking about how to do community safety if we can't get a handle on this stuff. And I think part of how we get a handle on this stuff has to be an increase in, again, just that infrastructure, that social infrastructure that we need to like be out on the streets again together, to be with one another, to like create situations where we feel like we are watching out for one another. I know that sounds really hippy dippy, but I feel like building that cultural and social muscle back is really, really just important for us as we talk about safety.
I don't think that's hippy dippy at all. I think that's very real. Marcia, you look like you want to chime in.
Yeah, I think that's very real. I mean, one thing that needs to happen right now is for people to demand that our mayor, who released a budget late and in a format no one knew how to read, and did not cut the police at all, we need to contact the mayor and our council people, and the council members are now in the process of having budget hearings. And I have a promise from Grover that she will send you the dates and times and links for those. Oh, and there you are. It's in the chat. Bless you, Grover. It's in the chat. I think, I mean, that because the timing, the budget happens by the end of June. So that's what we need to be doing right now. Because without a change in the priorities of our city government as expressed in the budget, which is a moral document, it documents our values. And right now, the values in our budget are not mine. I don't think there are anyone else's around in this that I can see here. So.
Thank you. Thanks so much for bringing it concretely to what's happening right now in advocacy. Damien or Kaija, do either of you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think Marcia makes an excellent point, and Ener as well, as just really considering the amount of money we spend on policing, and really, I think a solution would be to take that money that can be better served in other services and taking that, basically having the police do less stuff. And actually, a lot of police will say this, we're really off the record, or retired police officers, they'll say that the police just do too many things, really things that they are not equipped to do. One being responding to the folks who are in mental health crisis, or responding to people who are in a housing crisis. I just think that other trained people would be better handle those situations. And really, this idea of taking away something that police historically did, it's really a part of history. It's actually been done before. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Freedom House ambulance service. It was a service that happened. It was started in Pittsburgh in the 1960s and 67. And before that, all around America, when you call 911, you got a police officer. Now you call 911, you'll get paramedics, you'll get the ambulance. No, you only got police officer. If you were choking, if you were having an asthma attack, they sent the guy with a gun to figure it out. And if you need to go to the hospital, sometimes they throw you in the back of the police, or maybe gently putting you in the back of the police wagon and take you to a hospital. But in 1967, in Pittsburgh, they started the very first emergency medical service. And they actually hired Black men from the Black community in Pittsburgh to do it, because the Black folks in that community felt like the police, well, because they were less responsive to their issues. And in their first year, they saved 200 people's lives because of that. And every year after that, they were fought by the mayor of Pittsburgh because of that, and by the police. Even when they were clearly doing something that was saving people's lives, the state still felt the need to attack them, and a lot of that had to do with race. They were, like I said, they were mostly Black. Eventually, they did fire all of those emergency service workers and hired really an all-white crew to do it. And yeah, but that was the foundation of ambulance services in this country. It's something that police used to do, but we figured out, as a country, hey, police can't handle this. We should send trained people to deal with this situation. And I think you all, I feel like most people would agree. I'd rather have a paramedic show up when I'm choking than a police officer. And yeah, and I just think going forward, we can use that example to see where we can have police interact less with the community and have someone who's really trained to deal with these mental health situation or a housing crisis, and really look at it from that perspective.
Wow, thank you for dropping some historical knowledge on us, Damien. Love it. Kaija?
Yes, so I believe that our way towards a better future is just understanding that folks are deserving of being housed, and are deserving of being of having access to deeply affordable and decommodified housing. We need our elected officials to listen to tenant advocacy organizations who are supporting tenants and unhoused folks who can really account for the needs of our communities. Understanding that people, not institutions, have the answers to these conditions and problems that we are facing. And I agree with Marcia, we need to place more pressure on our elected officials here in Oakland, on our mayor, to ensure that our communities have funding for the things that our communities well deserve, and not into institutions that do not serve us, and are forcing us to create alternatives to keep us safe, like a few of us on this panel are having to do within our communities. And I feel like we have to continue to do what we're doing now, in imagining and putting forth our collective efforts for the lives and the futures that we know we are deserving of, and to really make that vision tangible for our communities. Really pushing towards, or pushing away from, what has been painted in front of us as what needs to be acceptable while we're here living lives. I feel like we are generative communities who have kept us safe for a great deal of time, and can do that now. So I feel like we have all that we need in order to push towards a better future.
I love that. I love that vision of abundance and hope, that we already have all that we need to go forward. And I think some of it is going back to what we all used to know in community, and hopefully still have in us. And Ener talked about that. It's like we have to relearn how to deal with each other. And Ener, when you were talking about what makes you feel safe, I was thinking about a few years ago at one of the Martin Luther King Day marches and teach-ins, starting at Lincoln Square Park in Chinatown. And I was there, and I think you were there with your family too. And it was a situation where in a park, the park was teeming with kids, like so way too many, maybe more kids than should have been on that play structure, but it was like so much fun. Everyone's having a good time, with families everywhere. And I lost sight of my two kids, who were probably like 3 and 5 at the time, or 4 and 6 at the time. I couldn't see them anymore. And I kind of had this moment of panic, but it didn't last very long, because I was surrounded by parents and families, a few of whom I knew and others I didn't. And you just kind of knew if you lost your kids, someone was going to help you out. And I think I turned to somebody who I had just met, and I said, can you just help me keep it, like find my kid, basically. And we found them pretty quickly. But that was just a situation where it was just the feeling of community in a public park, where we were all gathered, and you just kind of knew that even strangers were going to have your back. And I think that's what, and there weren't police there, and if they'd been there, that's not who I would have gone to first, right? So I think that's what we all need to get back to. So I appreciate you all bringing that. So I'm going to go ahead in just a minute and switch us over to the Q&A. I see one question there, and Grover's going to help us out for this point, that piece. But yeah, I was going to say, do you all want to add a little bit more, or dialogue a bit more based on that? Go ahead.
I think one of the questions, and I'm not sure if you're going to get to it at the end, or you're going to transition back, but you were looking for just kind of some concrete examples of what housing providers, property owners, community institutions can do. And I don't know if we want to get to that now or later. Up to you.
You know what? Let's do that. I was forgetting that we were going to do that now instead of in the end. So let's go there. Yes. So what are the concrete things that that we can do? Housing providers, property owners, and institutions. Go for it. Ener, you want to start with that one?
Well, thank you for that question, Gloria. I had no idea you were going to ask that, and I wasn't prepared with anything to answer. So no, let me talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that we've been doing in Oakland Chinatown since about 2017 as a coalition and as a group of organizations that have been really deeply invested in that specific community for 50, 60 years. I'm just going to put a quick YouTube video in the chat for folks to look at later at some point, or I don't know if it's in the chat, if it works in the chat, or well, anyway, I'll put it in there and someone will figure it out, I'm sure. But, a couple years ago in 2017, 2 of our partners in Chinatown, the Asian Health Services Health Clinic and the Asian Prisoners Support Committee, APSC, started this amazing program called the Chinatown Ambassador Program. And, the very 30-second version story of this is that it was started initially out of an ethnic studies program inside of San Quentin Penitentiary. And we were all very interested in how to figure out, these folks were kind of coming back to our community, coming home, and we were interested in like, what are these folks going to do when they get here? Like, how are we going to prevent recidivism? How are we going to welcome them home? And so Asian Health Services did this really amazing thing and just started hiring folks coming out of this program to do some basic stuff first, light security work, helping with, they were setting up kind of, they would set up pop-up events from time to time. So they would come out and help set up tents. They eventually got into administration, stuff like that. So it was really amazing that trying to create a pipeline for folks to come into after coming home. And one of the things that EBALDC did is we really kind of helped this group called Chinatown Improvement Initiative bring those ambassadors out more into the neighborhood and have them not just be folks that would help Asian Health Services, but that could have a community visible kind of role in our neighborhood. And over time, these guys were, a lot of them were, big dudes, shaved heads, tatted arms. And so a lot of the merchants in Chinatown would really kind of skeptical of them, I would say, at first, but then after 5-6 months of these guys being there every day, early in the morning, doing graffiti abatement, picking up trash, cleaning the sidewalks, they started building relationships with folks. And the merchants started trusting them. The people in the neighborhood started, because they were seeing them so much, they were outfitted in high visibility vests. And they just started building relationships with people. And to the point where it was almost like safety was almost a side effect of their presence, being around, helping folks. They got to know the names of many homeless individuals and could start referring them to services. And so when homeless folks started having, if they had an episode or some kind of breakdown there, someone could step in, someone who knows their name could step in and say, hey, Mike, I see you're having a problem. Like, come with me, come over here. Let's help you feel safer. Let's help you get better. And seniors on the street would see that and realize, oh, somebody's here to help with this problem. We don't need to call the police. We're gonna kind of take care of this and de-escalate this. And it was just a really, really amazing kind of program that unfortunately during COVID, we kind of bootstrapped it for many years and just kind of ran it on donations. It just wasn't very sustainable. And so COVID happened and the program kind of shut down. One of the things that EBALDC has been working on, and I hope that other affordable housing developers who have property in Chinatown are also working on, is bringing a kind of a CBD, a community benefit district out, which is kind of a small special property tax assessment district. And we're hoping to get this started by early next year so that this program, the Chinatown Ambassador Program, would have a permanent source of funding for 10 years to be able to operate, and we wouldn't have to just kind of keep bootstrapping through donations. But that's one really kind of concrete thing that I think as a community development organization, we've been really excited to participate in and support and lead. And we hope that other property owners and other affordable owners in the neighborhood are also can also get behind. So thanks for allowing me to do that completely surprise pitch.
Yes, completely surprised. Thank you for bringing that to us. All right, other examples of concrete things that we can do. Who'd like to go next? Marcia.
The alternative policing is not just First Congo. It's a coalition of other faith communities and other organizations, and we've met to have courses in street medicine and conflict resolution and self-defense, and we're trying to create that kind of training for people on a bigger scale, and we're focusing now on just getting to know our neighbors and so that we can create mutual aid networks. I mean, the real first responders are our neighbors. They're the people that are there. And one of the things when you contact the mayor and your council about the budget is what if there were, instead of, one of our building is way bigger than we are. So it's a community center. And one of the things we've experienced over the years is often unhoused people have set up camp on our ground, and a neighbor will call the police, which means we get a call, and then one of us as a volunteer, we're lay led, comes to try to come between the police and the person. What if instead there was a liaison in the city paid to help an organization like ours that really has space and land that we would love to be using to help house folks, but have not been able to find a way to do that. And finally, I'm going to put in our Facebook page, if people are interested in joining the coalition, the Alternatives to Policing Facebook page. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Others?
I can go next. Well, I think the biggest thing is removing police from your properties and investing in community and building-led safety measures. A lot of time tenant unions, buildings with tenant unions have these things set up, and it serves tenants really, really great to just be able to know that they have that alternative, and be in touch with community mediation and de-escalation groups for tenant-to-tenant issues, so that tenants know that there's an option towards resolution that doesn't involve the police as well. And then, lastly, just get connected with organizations who are supporting tenants, and make a means of really addressing what tenants in your building and your spaces need, so that they feel safe and feel like they can make that space a home as well.
Damien, you want to round us out?
No, not really. What I'm hearing from everyone is just that building better communities where we all feel together, and I was like, that sounds like a great idea. I never talk to my neighbors, but that probably would make us safer if I did eventually.
Yes, we're too inclined to talk to our neighbors only when there's a problem, and not just be building those relationships, the practice of being neighborly, right, on a daily basis, rather than just calling when there's a problem. All right, let's go over to our Q&A then, so we can get in some of these questions that are coming in. And I'm gonna call on Grover to help me out with this, since they've been monitoring the Q&A. So Grover, do you want to, if you're ready, do you want to come on and read some of these questions for us?
Sure.
Awesome.
First, Gloria, did you move the question from Allie Cunningham into answered?
I did not, but I think Ener typed in an answer, so I think that's why
I see. So
I
didn't understand the protocols, and I was just typing as I saw them.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I'll just re-tee it up. The question is, have you found or identified best practices for affordable housing property management that puts alternatives to policing in action, creating protocol and culture where the police are not the first to be called? And if at all called, how can it be the very last resort? So Kaija referred to this a bit in your answer. And then Ener as well, like we're talking at the edges of that, but I wanted to put it directly out there in case someone has a direct answer.
Well, I want to say, first of all, that it's nice for me to be able to say some things. I'm also super privileged. I work in real estate development, which is like, take a lot of phone calls. I look at spreadsheets a lot and, write things. Our property management staff and our on-site services staff have truly challenging jobs that are often kind of expose them to a very particular type of trauma that I don't get exposed to. And so I don't mean to make light of it or say that like, and I don't even say, and I hope no one construes this as that I believe that there's no place for police. There is a place for police in our society because we have violent crime that needs to get dealt with. But I will say that we have learned over time that there are some things that police are not and should not be effective at dealing with. And there are everyday frictions that are you know, a pain in the butt to deal with. And you know, we have neighbors who don't get along, and you know, there's noise complaints, and there's things like that. And our property management staff and services staff have figured out that it's more effective for them to deal with those things than to call the police. So you know, we've had so many instances of neighbor tensions between one another that really need to get resolved. And unfortunately, it means investing in people's time, in services staffing time, and property management staffing time to be able to resolve those things. And it's not easy, and it's easy for me to say, yeah, that's what people should do, but I don't have to do it on a day-to-day basis. And so I recognize also that that me saying it can sound a little tone deaf at times. But we have had a lot of incidents on our properties of neighbor tension between residents of the same building. And it takes, there's no easy way around it. It takes a ton of time. It takes so much time of our staff to really help people kind of resolve it. And I hope that time that we spend is an investment, and it's an investment in kind of long-term social cohesion within our buildings, within our very, very diverse, racially and ethnically diverse buildings, that leads to better relationships within the buildings. And I think that it does. I believe that it does because my staff have shown it over time. Our buildings have shown it over time, but it's not cheap and it's not fast.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to this question before we take the next one?
Well, just that, thank you for that. And I think if the owners are willing to invest in training for conflict resolution, restorative justice circles, and alternatives for their staff, it would be a huge investment that would move away from having to call the police.
Okay, thank you. If there's any other comments, Kaija or Damien? Okay, great.
Sorry, I just realized there was one more thing that I typed previously, and I apologize. I typed previously, but I maybe just say it so that it's out in the open. We can do this also. You know, in our property management protocols were rewritten to deal with ICE raids. You know, how we were going to only cooperate with ICE raids when we were giving legal notices to do so. How we dealt with safety in the era of COVID. So these protocols that we have are not forever. You know, when we write them, we have to adjust them to real life. And so any good, and I know that we have lots of great kind of property management folks within the EBALDC family. You know, any good set of policies is going to have to be revised over time and adjusted to the changing realities over time. And so, you know, I think we can do it. It's not cheap and it's not easy, but it's necessary as part of our work. So.
And Grover, if I can just tag on to something Ener just mentioned, because I thank you for reminding me, Ener, about this issue of ICE raids in multifamily affordable housing. We actually had EBALDC for our affordable housing week a few years ago. We did a training about that because I know this affected EBALDC, and at the beginning of the Trump era, this affected a number of our nonprofit developer members. And it started when in San Francisco, there was an ICE raid at a property, I think in the Mission, where the officers came into the property basically through a preschool or right past the preschool that was at that affordable housing property. So all the kids got to see these folks with guns coming in and got freaked out. And the leadership, the property managers and the leadership at that affordable housing property were like, nope, not okay. And I have to put in a little bit of a plug for nonprofit managed housing here with all the challenges that we've acknowledged, that there were a number of nonprofit housers who said, this is not an acceptable situation for our tenants. We care about our tenant safety. We do question the right of, and they actually like published know your rights cards for tenants, and did and so that people knew what to do if someone came to their door, so that property managers knew what to do if ICE showed up outside the gate of an affordable housing property. And I don't think just any landlord of a multifamily property would necessarily take that on. So I just wanted to point that out, because I think those of you on this call who are property managers, providers, developers, have a lot of power to both negatively but also positively impact what's the experience for residents. Thank you for bringing that up. Grover, what do we have next? Or actually, I should say, anybody else want to comment on this one? All right, Grover, over to you.
Great. The next question is, I'm curious about how the community can come together to push cities and public housing authorities to put pressure on HUD. So 2 parts there, to start allowing people with a criminal record to apply for Section 8, which is a housing voucher assistance. And they say folks sometimes commit crimes out of necessity for themselves or for their families, and they shouldn't be discounted from rental assistance after serving their time. So does anybody want to take this advocacy question up? And maybe also if somebody could elaborate for a moment about how that increases our collective community safety. I'm just gonna integrate that in.
Well, I can speak to the need for organizing when a collective of folks are experiencing things that aren't working for them. It's extremely unfortunate that folks who have gone through the carceral system are not always accepted within HUD, and just highlights more disparities within that institution itself. And what I can say is I just feel like you should always feel like you can go to your community organizations that are throwing down over issues like this, or over issues that are coming up within tenants or tenant needs, to really relay that this is something that is happening at a widespread pace, to see what community-led action can come out of just vocalizing this as a problem that a lot of your community members are facing. And what we see a lot of times is that things are not as isolated as they seem, and there are many answers to questions that we don't feel are always as tangible. So just being able to reach out and also make a plan with your community members about how you want to push forward in elevating this issue is super doable, and something that has moved a lot of our tenant protections that we have here in Oakland and in SF as well, to really fit the need of tenants. It's all possible, it's all doable. And thankfully, there are many of us who are throwing down at different levels to ensure that tenants have what they need for different issues. So I think you should just talk with your folks and reach out to folks as well.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to take this question on, or should I move to the next?
Well, I just think that the success of the Ban the Box campaign for non-HUD housing should give us hope. I mean, it's trickier when you're dealing with a federal agency, but there are, as Kaija said, organizing can change anything if enough people.
I just want to call back to Damien's story, actually the story that Damien started off with about his cousin. And Americans are so funny. Like, we're so afraid of getting like ripped off by poor people in really small ways. And like this issue of like, oh, this, you know, vulnerable person is getting over on the system because she's living in a house, a place where she's not specifically named on the lease. And as affordable housing providers, we all know this, right? Like we all have to do this like very, very cumbersome recertification processes every month of like who's living in the unit and like who's you know, like making sure that nobody is a dollar over income, because God forbid that any, you know, someone a dollar over income should get any kind of public benefit. But you know, we really need to change, I think, in this country, how we see like who is deserving of help. It's really crazy that we spend so much of our auditing time and power trying to make sure that poor people don't get a little bit more benefit out of the system, and not like any energy kind of focusing on people who are like, you know, like making millions or billions of dollars off of things that they're not putting any real effort into. Like they're not benefiting anyone or doing anything of great social value, but they, you know, are making tons of money, and we just kind of like see that as okay. So I think there's a real reckoning of how in this country, like we see some people as deserving of being able to rip off others, and the other people as not being able to like just get what they need. So I don't know. It's a really tough question. I don't have a good way of doing it, of operationalizing that. It just seems so ridiculous to me that how much time and energy we focus on making sure that, you know, someone who makes $10 doesn't make $11 an hour. I don't know. Okay, sorry.
I mean, and yeah, and because affordable housing can really, having a place that you can afford, especially in the Bay Area, is life changing. And I say that from experience. The place that we lived at, the EBALDC property, that was the first place my mom could afford. That was the first place she called her own. And when my other family members who used to live in Oakland, when they had to move to the Pacific Northwest into Texas, like it seems like every, you know, a moderate income or low income person has to do nowadays in Oakland, it was our couch that you know was their stop before they moved on. It was our place that stayed there when my grandmother had to sell her home, when everyone had to leave the state. It was that affordable housing just room that they were able to use, and it really was something that my family had. It you know, that really protected us from homelessness, and I think that this sort of scarcity mentality that keeps, you know, these things where you have to be this perfect poor person in order to get this, you know, beautifully affordable place to live. I think that really does push people into homelessness and into crime, which in the sort of the you know, unending cycle. So yeah, I think that's like it's been said many times. There's an issue of housing at the sort of this the center of policing, things like that.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is specifically, does anyone have ideas about how municipalities can encourage community building in development plans?
I can take a stab at it just to start. Yeah, I also see this question in the chat from Brittany Keek. I hope I'm saying that right. Council member, welcome. I'm afraid I don't know which municipality you're from, but welcome. And you have a couple questions about building community. I think it's really, you know, I'm a city planner by training. I think it's super hard to engineer true community building through the traditional tools that local governments have, to be perfectly honest. I think when I started planning school, there was this idea that if you just design things well enough, people would magically integrate. And there's a lot of thinking that, oh, if you build mixed income housing, for example, cross-class friendships, and will magically happen. And actually the studies show that unfortunately that is actually not true. People sort, even if they're living in the same building, even if they're living in the same neighborhood, but at least there's a chance. And I think it's more than just housing. This actually goes back to what Ener said. You have to have shared and safe street life. You have to have spaces where people gather. My colleague Kiki, who's also here, was talking about how the Acoma market in East Oakland has become one of those rare open gathering spaces in a neighborhood that doesn't have tons of green space, ton of open space. So I think you have to have all that civic infrastructure there so that people are encountering people that they, like Lake Merritt. Okay, I haven't been to Lake Merritt throughout the whole pandemic because it terrifies me, but in better times, Lake Merritt, everybody goes to the lake, right? So you can't sort as much. And then I think just on the local government type of development processes specifically, I think it's about authentic community engagement. You're never gonna get everyone in the community, but like having real conversations where you're getting people who are representative of the neighborhood to come talk about the plans that are happening. I see Ener's hand is up.
Yeah, and I just want to say I've talked a lot, so if other folks want to go first, I'm really happy to cede. But if it's okay, because I've thought about this a lot, I think I so appreciate the question, and especially if it was by a local council person, council member. I so appreciate that question because I think it's very, very tempting to in development, but then also the way that the fiscal incentives for development work. We're so tempted as a society or whatever to build new shiny things, and I think that that building of new shiny things is generally so that a community can target new people coming in to a place. And I think the alternative to that, which is what we've done a lot of advocacy for over the years, is actually to invest in and strengthen your existing community assets. So I don't know what city the questioner is coming from, but in Oakland, for instance, we have a choice about kind of whether to build this new ballpark for the A's. And there's a lot of talk about all the shiny new toys that would come along with a stadium, this gondola over Old Oakland, some new connection walking path like around West Oakland, and a walking bike path around West Oakland or something like that. And I think from a community member's perspective, what I think we would like is show us how you're going to invest more in the places that we already use, in the places where people who live here today, who have lived here for generations, what are those amazing assets like Lake Merritt, like Lincoln Rec Center, like these places where communities have already been gathering. What can we do to strengthen those places instead of being like, oh, you know what we should do? We should have this new development and we should build a park in the middle of that new development. Well, now you've built another asset that has to be maintained over time, and that maintenance of that new asset is going to compete with the budget that you have to maintain your existing assets, which is going to make your existing residents feel crappy because they're like, oh, that new park is for those new people who are moving into those new buildings, not for the people who are have been here. So that is a very, very specific kind of outlook that I think elected officials can have when they look at new development, is what resources is that new development bringing to existing social assets and infrastructure that can serve the people who have been here already.
Thank you for that perspective, Ener. Yes. So Gloria, do we have time for one more question?
I think if the panelists are okay with it, I think we do, because I don't know which one you're thinking of going to, but I feel like Erin's got a good one. There are a couple other good ones in there, so I think we can get one more in there. That would be great.
Yeah, I was going to ask Erin's question, and I'm going to summarize it a bit for length. Erin is a works in resident services for an affordable housing developer, and says that Erin has struggled with situations where residents report an immediate emergency safety concern, like someone with a weapon or fear of violence. And so the question is, beyond the longer term work that you've named that we have to do to address the root causes of violence in our communities, do any of the panelists have recommendations for what property owners should do in these immediate moments when a property owner feels like they need to call the police because of a threat of violence?
I think this question can also be expanded out to obviously apply to the property perspective, but just kind of in the community in general, because this is the question that we hear a lot, right? It's like, what do we do in that immediate moment? So does anyone have a response to that?
I do again, but again, please feel free to kick me under the table if I'm talking too much. So, okay.
Go ahead.
I have a feeling I'm going to say something, and then other people might rebut. So, I would say if the way that we have trained our property supervisors and property managers, which I think is I agree with, is if there is if there's an immediate threat of violence, call the police. I do think, I said earlier, I think police are necessary. And I don't want to be construed of speaking out of both sides of my mouth, because what I really think is that we don't not need police. What we need is actually more effective policing. And I think Damien brought this up earlier with his example about the ambulances. And I know that Kaija, who's been involved in with Anti-Police Terror Project, APTP, has seen some of this data as well, which APTP has done a lot to get out there and educate folks on, which is that we think the challenge is that when you in your mind think of like, God, in what instance do I need to call the police? It is that if someone is with a gun and actively threatening folks, like that is a moment for the police. And we want the police to respond quickly and effectively, but they can't. Police have a hard time responding effectively and quickly if we have them busy doing 10 other things. If they're busy responding to traffic citations, if they're busy responding to noise complaints, if they're busy towing cars, like they've got 10 other things that they're doing with their time. I think in Oakland, something like only like 11% of police calls are for violent crime or property crime. And so if we have our police spending 89% of their time doing other things, then of course they're going to be less effective and less responsive to the things that we really need them for. And so my response to that situation is to really know and prepare your staff ahead of time for what really is an emergency that is going to require police intervention and what is not. And talking about those things a lot, drilling into folks like, hey, if it's a noise complaint, don't call the police. That's not what the police are for. If it's an emergency, that's when we need to call the police. And we need to do a lot more education among all people so that the 911 lines clear up for real emergencies, so that police don't feel like super hurried, like they have to like whip in and out of situations in like 15 minutes so that they can get to the next non-emergency thing. Like all those things I think are true. And so I would say, like, again, we do need the police, but we need them for very, very specific things. And we want them to be effective and conscientious and prepared to deal with those specific things. And we don't need them for so many other things.
I can speak to this question because I think it's like a real concern for folks to think about what could be like an immediate source of support when high stress and high danger situations occur within like a building. And I think it's always important for folks to be able to assess what safety and like what a means of like a safe intervention looks like, and to be really intentional about that. Because although I don't believe that police need to be called and brought into community situations, I do believe that being able to be prepared, you know, like Ener talked about situations and a means for de-escalation within that property and within that space is super doable, has been done, and helps to alleviate tenants and property managers of that like burden of just not knowing what to do. So really thinking through what is accessible, what's a means of keeping everyone safe, because for a lot of us, calling the police is not a means of containing safety, either within that situation or in dealing with having to like have the carceral system be brought into situations for folks to have to experience that as well out of a result of whatever experience. So really assess what safety can and needs to look like for a collective of folks, and devise a plan around making sure that that's something that that folks have a great amount of access around and support around as well. It's super doable, and I know that it's scary to think about, you know, how do we situate ourselves within safety, and divesting from this idea that has, you know, prompted itself as safety for us for such a long time. But I'm really appreciative of this panel because we all got to talk about just the other ways that we see community being able to hold these sort of situations down, and these same questions, or just watch these same questions be answered as well. And our community is supporting efforts around mediation or de-escalation that anyone can have access to and that anyone can do as well.
Damien, did you have any responses to this last question?
No, can you remind me what the question was again?
I think we were talking about the immediate response issue, and Ener and Kaija had offered slightly different perspectives on immediate response to violence or threats. It can also pass, but if you just want to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, like in my head, if I see someone, you know, waving a gun around, I'd want to call the police. But I know I would hesitate to do that because I know it's very possible that the police could think that I'm the person, especially if they're Black. It's very possible that they you know would respond to me as if I was a criminal. So really, because of just the history of policing, because we really are, I feel like, in a emergency situation right now with how police are acting or responding to crime or responding to, you know, anything happening within the Black community. I feel like I don't know what to do, and I think it'd be great to have more options that involve less people dying, that involve less guns, especially, you know, those sent by the state. I think that'd be great. But yeah, I just have to say, you know, I don't know. It really feels like we're in a crisis right now, and something drastic has to be done to, you know, to change things.
Thank you for that. Definitely agree, and thanks for sharing that very real perspective. And I think that, you know, what we've been talking about this whole time is options. How can we have, because the options right now on both sides are not great. Not intervening when something is going down, not great. Calling the police, also sometimes not great. Right? Depending on our experience, our neighborhood, and everything else. So we need more options. And as Kaija said earlier, we have it within us, and we have to draw them out. And we actually have an event happening next Friday that I hope you will join us for, which focuses more on that visioning and taking us to the next phase. It's a reimagining event that many of our staff will be involved in, and Grover will put the information in the chat for that reimagining community safety. So please join us for that as well, for a different approach to all this. So I want to really thank our panelists and also see if any of them have was there any burning 15, 30-second thing that Grover and I didn't get to, that you want to share before we close?
Well, I wanted to first thank everyone because this was super fun and something I would have attended if I wasn't a panelist. So thank you all for putting this together. I just wanted to drop the hotline that someone has mentioned in the chat for Mental Health First, which is a project of APTP, which is an alternative to policing here in Oakland, started off in Sacramento. And the number is 510-999-1 MH First, and I'll drop that in the chat as well. Yes, but that is something that you can access now as well.
Thank you so much for that. Any other last plugs or reflections? Oh, go ahead, Marcia.
I just want to thank you as well. And I'll just repeat something that I saw on Facebook last week, that safe communities don't have more police, they have more services. And I think that's the bottom line.
Yes, they also have more affordable housing, going back to Damien's initial point. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out in the chat, our council member joining us from Livermore mentioned that they're trying to build 100% affordable housing in their downtown. And I want to make sure the comments I said earlier about how you can't engineer social integration just through mixed income housing, that's true, but it's necessary if not sufficient. So EBHO's actually been trying to support that affordable housing in the downtown of Livermore, which has become hugely contentious because the city wants to do the right thing and build housing for people who can't afford high-end housing in their downtown, close to opportunity, close to other people. And a lot of people are coming out and opposing it. So Councilor, I'm going to see you. I'll be at that hearing next week. Someone said, the best way to celebrate Affordable Housing Month is to go out and support some affordable housing. Let's make sure that we all do that. So with that, Ener and Damien, I'm sorry, I don't think I went to you for any last words, but anything else that you wanted to add before we close?
No, thank you so much to you, Gloria, and to the panelists, and also to Grover and all the EBHO staff that put this together. Thank you.
Likewise, yeah, thank you. This was really informative and great, and I appreciate everybody being here on this panel. It's awesome.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And thanks to all of you who stuck with us and listened. We really appreciate it. And Kaija, you gave us the best endorsement, a panel that you would actually attend yourself, even in the audience. Love it. So thank you all so much. We hope to see you for other events. Have a wonderful afternoon.